Very good, John. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm John Hellerstedt, the Commissioner of the Texas Department of State Health Services and the presiding officer for this task force. And I want to welcome you all here. This is our 10th meeting of the Task Force on Infectious Disease Preparedness and Response. I want to thank the members who are on the call, and I want to thank the members of the public who are going to participate in this as well. I want to introduce John Chacon, who will provide logistical announcements and will conduct the roll call. John?
Thank you very much, Dr. Hellerstedt. Good afternoon. My name is John Chacon, and I'm with the Health and Human Services Commission, Policy and Rules Advisory Committee Coordination Office, ACCO for short. This meeting is being conducted in compliance with the Texas Open Meetings Act and is open to the public. Today's meeting is a virtual live public event and being recorded as a matter of public record. Please do not use jargon and acronyms. Confidential information should not be discussed. For the sake of those viewing the live public event, we ask that each speaker state their name each time prior to beginning their comments. For task force members, staff, and presenters in the live event, please speak directly into the microphone of your device so your voice and comment can be heard. Once you're done speaking, we ask that you place your microphone in mute and only unmute when you need to speak. For task force members and presenters that called in to join the meeting, we ask that you mute the microphone from your viewing device. Also, task force members and presenters joining us in the live event, if you have headsets, we recommend that you use them to prevent feedback from the speakers from your listening device. For task force members and presenters who plan to utilize a PowerPoint or handout during their presentation, one of our producers will pull up your PowerPoint or handout and will advance the slides or pages by you indicating next slide or next page. For task force members, staff, and presenters who are participating in the live event and who are not participating by phone, please put your cell phones on mute or vibrate. If you need to take a call, please turn off the video and microphone options from your viewing device so the sound doesn't carry back into the live public event. Members of the public were notified in the posted public agenda that if they would like to address the task force, to email DSHS by emailing Evelyn Hahn, Legislative and Policy Liaison, at taskforceid@dshs.texas.gov, no later than 5 p.m. on Wednesday, January 6, 2021. There is time on the agenda for public comment, and members of the public were also given the opportunity to register to provide oral comment during the meeting. Please note that all comments will be restricted to 3 minutes, and requests to provide oral public comment will be taken during the live event through the Q&A box. The public will be called in to join the live event to provide comment in the order the comment forms were received and for the specific agenda item they chose to provide testimony on. Once a public member concludes their comments and members are offered the opportunity to ask clarifying questions, the public member will be dropped from the live event platform and can continue viewing the meeting via the public live link from the posted agenda. At this time, I would like to call roll, and task force members, when I call your name, please respond with here or present, and we ask that you briefly introduce yourself. Dr. Ogechika Olozi. Dr. Olozi. Mr. Toby Baker.
Hi, yes, I'm here, Toby Baker, Executive Director of the TCEQ.
Thank you so much. Mr. James Boss.
Present. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Department of Transportation.
Thank you so much. Dr. Christopher Fry.
Present, and I am a professor of pharmacy with UT Austin.
Thank you. Dr. Sheila Haley. Commissioner John Hellerstedt.
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Peter Hotez.
I'm here.
And you can briefly introduce yourself, Dr. Hotez.
Yes, Peter Hotez, professor at Baylor College of Medicine and dean of our School of Tropical Medicine. I'm a vaccine scientist and who's also helped lead an effort to develop a COVID-19 vaccine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hotez. Secretary of State Ruth Hughes.
Good afternoon, Ruth Hughes, Texas Secretary of State.
Thank you. Mr. Harrison Keller.
This is Harrison Keller. I'm the Commissioner of Higher Education.
Thank you so much. Mr. Nim Kidd.
Hey, good afternoon. Nim Kidd, Chief of the Texas Division of Emergency Management.
Thank you very much. Dr. Thomas Sizek.
Here, I'm a professor at UTMB in the Department of Pathology and work at the Galveston National Laboratory.
Thank you. Dr. David Lakey.
Good afternoon. I'm David Lakey. I'm an infectious disease physician by training, currently serving as the Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs and Chief Medical Officer for the University of Texas System. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Bin Min Lei. Dr. James Leduc.
Yes, this is Jim Leduc. I'm the director of the Galveston National Laboratory at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Scott Lillybridge. Dr. Scott Lillybridge. Mr. Tony Marquette. Mr. Steve McCraw. Mr. Michael Mora. Dr. Christy Murray.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Christy Murray, Professor of Pediatrics and Immunology and Microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine. And I'm also Vice Chair for Research for Pediatrics at Texas Children's Hospital and Assistant Dean of the School of Tropical Medicine with Dr. Peter Hotez, and a background infectious disease epidemiologist.
Thank you, Doctor. Major General Tracy Norris.
This is Colonel Peter Colwell. I'm the permanent replacement for General Norris. I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I am the joint surgeon for the Texas Military Department.
Thank you very much. Mr. Patrick O'Daniel.
Here, Chair, Texas Board of Criminal Justice.
Dr. Dorothy Overman.
I am present, Dr. Dorothy Overman, family medicine physician, New Braunfels, Texas.
Thank you. Mr. Daniel Owens.
I am present. I'm the Executive Director for the Association of Texas EMS Professionals and medic with the City of Austin.
Thank you. Dr. Gerald Parker. Dr. Gerald Parker. Mr. David Slayton.
Here, this is David Slayton. I'm the Administrative Director of the Courts for the Texas Office of Court Administration.
Thank you. Dr. Victoria Sutton.
Hi, I am a lawyer and a scientist and professor of law at Texas Tech University and director of the Center for Biodefense Law and Public Policy.
Thank you. County Judge Nancy Tanner.
Good afternoon. I am Nancy Tanner, and I'm the Potter County Judge in Amarillo, Texas.
Thank you. Dr. Surendra Barma.
Yeah, good afternoon. I am Executive Associate Dean for Texas Tech and also Professor of Pediatrics at Texas Tech.
Thank you. Mr. Bobby Wilkinson.
Here, Bobby Wilkinson, Executive Director, Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs.
Thank you. Executive Commissioner Cecily Young.
Present.
Dr. Edward Iosowitz.
Present, thank you. I am the Managing Partner of the Women's Specialists of Houston, the Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, Texas.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Ben Zeller.
Present, and good afternoon to everyone. Ben Zeller, Victoria County Judge.
Thank you. Dr. Alozi.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ogachiko Lozzi, infectious disease specialist and chief medical officer at Del Sol Medical Center in El Paso, Texas.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sheila Haley. Dr. Hellerstedt, you do have a quorum of the task force. At this time, I'll turn over the meeting to you.
Very good, John. Thank you very much. I do want to have some opening remarks here and talk a little bit about what we plan to do this afternoon. Clearly, the main agenda item really is the pandemic caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, a novel coronavirus that is the cause of COVID-19 disease. And clearly, we are now essentially 1 year past, if you will, the official birth date of this virus, which was announced on December 31st, 2019. That's why it's called COVID-19. We have seen really an unprecedented global history unfold before our eyes. I'll go into our present status a little bit later and one of the agenda items, but suffice it to say, I think we're at a very critical period where we're still seeing infection rates rise. We're still seeing hospitalization numbers of COVID-infected patients occupying hospital beds around the state. That's not only higher than it's ever been before, but it is actually still continuing to accelerate. And so that's a very worrisome situation. We have the bright ray of hope of vaccine on the horizon, but that's going to take some time before it has an effect. And so in the meantime, we really must be the voice to reinforce with our communities, with our families, with our loved ones, that the things that have got us really, I think, successfully, we should think of, have got us successfully to the point where we are today, what are often known as non-pharmaceutical interventions. So in other words, physical social distancing, wearing of masks when distancing isn't possible, personal hygiene, hand washing, and disinfecting surfaces. And we really need to redouble the efforts on that and rely on that. And it's not just, if you will, in public spaces, public gathering spaces, but it's also in private gathering spaces as well. So anytime we gather with persons who are outside of our immediate household, we need to observe those precautions. So much of the spread of COVID-19 comes from people with no symptoms at all, or either completely asymptomatic, as we call it, or pre-symptomatic. They haven't yet begun to be sick or have very, very minor types of symptoms. And the CDC estimates that 80% of the spread of COVID-19 has been as a result of persons who probably were not aware at all that they were actually had that infection. And so that creates a real need for us as leaders to continue to get the word out to as many ears as are willing to listen, that the things that we've done in the past that we know are effective against every virus is effective against this one, even though this is a novel virus. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I've talked to my infectious disease specialist, the infectious disease officer for the state, and we're noting, thank goodness, a remarkably low influenza season. And that is directly related, obviously, I think, to the precautions we've taken against the flu. Certainly people, we had a call to action to get more vaccine, but the other things that we're practicing that are meant to decrease the spread of respiratory viruses, especially the virus that causes COVID-19, is also having an effect on influenza. So we should remember that. We should repeat that lesson to folks so that they can understand that the things that we're asking them to do really work. So with that, I'd like to ask some of my team to introduce themselves. We'll start with Dr. Shiroj Ray.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Saroj Rai. Pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm the scientific advisor for the state.
Very good. Next, Imelda Garcia.
Hi, Dr. Hallerstadt. This is Ricardo Garcia. DSHS. Imelda is, she had to step away for an urgent matter, but she'll be right back.
All right, very good. Imelda Garcia is our Associate Commissioner for the Laboratory and Infectious Disease Division. She'll be presenting as well. I would just like to say that a lot of our response success is due to her leadership. No one should ever have to solve as many problems as Imelda Garcia has managed to solve throughout the course of this pandemic, and really the state owes her a debt of gratitude. I just want to talk about the fact that we will be listening to public comment, accepting public comment after that would be taken after agenda item number 5. So going on to the second agenda item, we want to look at the minutes from the meeting that was on December 7th, and that the draft minutes were emailed to the task force members for review. We would like you to locate those minutes and call for any edits or changes in the draft minutes. And with that, I'll pause a little bit before we entertain any motion. Is there anyone that wants to offer any edits or changes to the draft minutes? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion for approval.
This is David Lakey, and I motion to approve the minutes.
Very good. I would request a second for the motion.
This is Ogelozzi, I second.
Colonel Colwell,
Okay, Colonel, you're slow on the trigger there. Sorry, but who got in there first for the second?
It's Dr. Alozzi, sir.
Dr. Alozzi, thank you. First for the second. Why do I say things like that? Anyhow, we would. I'd like any other discussion on the minutes if anyone has that. Pending that, I need to turn it back over to Mr. Chacon. Because we're meeting virtually, we need to conduct a roll call vote on the minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellison. Task force members, when you hear your name, if you could indicate approve, disapprove, or abstain on the approval of the December 7, 2020 meeting minutes as presented. Dr. Alozzi.
Approve.
Mr. Toby Baker.
Approve.
Mr. James Boss.
Approve.
Dr. Christopher Fry.
Approve.
Dr. Sheila Haley. Commissioner John Hellerstedt.
Approve.
Dr. Peter Hotez.
Approve.
Secretary of State Ruth R. Hughes.
Approve.
Mr. Harrison Keller.
Approve.
Mr. Nim Kidd.
Approved.
Dr. Thomas Sizek.
Aye on the motion.
Thank you. Dr. David Lakey.
Approve.
Dr. Ben Min Lay. Dr. James LeDuc.
Approve.
Dr. Scott Lillibridge. Mr. Tony Marquette. Mr. Steve McCraw. Mr. Steve McCraw. Mr. Michael Morris. Dr. Christy Murray.
Approve.
Major General Tracy Norris.
Colonel Cowell approves.
Mr. Patrick O'Daniel.
Approve.
Dr. Dorothy Overman.
I approve.
Thank you. Mr. Daniel Owens.
Approve.
Dr. Gerald Parker. Mr. David Slayton.
Approve.
Thank you. Dr. Victoria Sutton.
Approve.
County Judge Nancy Tanner.
Approve.
Dr. Surendra Barma.
Approve.
Mr. Bobby Wilkinson.
Approve.
Executive Commissioner Young.
Approve.
Dr. Edward Yosowitz.
I approve, but I'd also like the minutes to reflect that I was at the meeting last month but was muted.
Okay, thank you for making that. The Honorable Ben Zeller.
Approve.
Let me go back real quickly here. Dr. Sheila Haley.
Approve.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And Mr. Steve McCraw. Okay, it being a unanimous vote of the task force, the motion carries. Dr. Hellerstedt, at this time, I'll turn over the meeting back to you.
Mr. Chacon, I apologize. Trying to find the mute button. Dr. Hellerstedt had to step away for a moment. If there's any action that we can skip to take up the time and not delay anyone until he can return, can we move to that action item, please?
The next agenda item was actually the presentation, his presentation on the situation update. If Saroj is ready, we can move up to the COVID-19 vaccine update.
John, this is Saroj. We can go ahead and do that, no problem.
Okay,
thank you, Saroj.
Thank you so very much. Producers, if you can please project the PowerPoint for agenda item number 4 on the COVID-19 vaccine update, please. We could please put it on read mode so we can see it. Okay, so Rose, the PowerPoint is up. Please proceed.
Okay, we can go to the next slide, John, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, task force members. This is Saroj Rai. Pleasure to be with and presenting some vaccine updates this afternoon.
Excuse me, Saroj, this is John. I'm sorry. Can you turn up the volume? You sound very faint, or you can get closer to the speaker.
I'm sorry, I had my face mask on, so is this better?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present some vaccine updates with you. As you see on the slide, there's been quite a bit of development since the last time we met with this group and talked about vaccines. So last time we met, I don't think we had any vaccines available or in the U.S., but now we have some significant progress to report, and hence why the stickers you see that I got, and I actually did get my vaccine. I qualified for one of the groups, so I did get my vaccine today, so I'm happy to have the sticker in front of me. So with that, we can go to the next slide. And As always, whenever we do any of our presentations, the information, this is a disclaimer that, you know, the information is evolving so rapidly. So the information we present here today is current as we know of right now and always subject to change. So next slide, please.
Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. We're going to try to get it up real quick here.
Sure.
Producers, can we please put it on read mode, please?
So, John, this is Dr. Hallerstedt. I'm back. That looks like my presentation. If you wish, I could get in if we're having trouble with Saroja's presentation.
I'm trying to see which part. Okay, yeah, there we go. Producer, this is John Chacon. Do we have the PowerPoint for agenda item number 4?
That looks like what I'm seeing on the screen right now, John.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we get it up to read mode so folks can actually view it a little bit clearer than that. Producers, this is John Chacon. Are we able to advance the slides? So, Rose, is this the slide that we're going to move up to next?
Yes. Would you like me to present or?
Yes, please proceed. Since we already have your PowerPoint up, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Sounds good. So as I was saying, since last time, we have some significant updates to report on the vaccine front. So well aware that last time when we discussed, we had Pfizer and Moderna. They were in the queue to be authorized by the FDA. And as you see the green box next to them, that they have been authorized by the FDA for us to use. And there are some differences between the two vaccines. Obviously, the similarities are, as we talked in some details last time, that they both share the messenger RNA as a platform, but storage and handling are differences. And now as we are coming to the second dose, their second dose intervals are different as well. Important to note that Pfizer is authorized for 16 years and older, and Moderna is authorized for 18 years and older. And another very critical important thing is that two vaccines, albeit they share the same technology platform, they are not interchangeable due to we just do not have data available at this point to use them interchangeably. And also, they are both 2-dose regimens intramuscularly given within those specified time intervals that you see on the slide. I also wanted to share some updates on the other vaccines that are listed here, and they're part of the Operation Warp Speed vaccine development. So AstraZeneca, we talked in some detail last time as well. This vaccine shares same platform as Janssen, which is Johnson & Johnson, and those two are the viral vector non-replicating platform vaccines. They are different than the Moderna and Pfizer with respect to not only the technology platform, but their storage and handling as well. They're what we would say friendlier and easier to in terms of storage and handling. They are stable in refrigerated conditions for 6 months, so that's a very good conditions to be, as opposed to the ultra cold chain, which is much more difficult to manage. The AstraZeneca vaccine is also 2-dose vaccine given about a month apart. However, we know that it received an emergency use authorization in the UK, and I know we don't need to divert our attention to what's happening in the UK, but because the vaccine is part of our Operation Warp Speed, I wanted to just provide that quick context. And in the US, AstraZeneca is still continuing its phase 3 trials, and anticipated timelines for its receiving, emergency use authorization in the US is probably towards the end of first quarter this year, somewhere between end of first quarter and second quarter of this year. And Janssen, so far, actually, they've been very quiet, but they are the ones who is doing the single dose assessment in their clinical trials, but we also know that they have another clinical trial going on that they're looking at 2-dose regimen as well. So they've been very quiet, but we'll see. They are doing one of the largest studies, as they have a total of 60,000 participants in their trial. So we look forward to getting some readout on their data and see how they're progressing. And the last one I wanted to mention this time that we have had some activities is the Novavax. And they have yet a third technology platform, which is the recombinant protein subunit technology platform. And in addition to that, they are the one vaccine as part of the Operation Warp Speed that is going to use adjuvant and combine with that technology platform. And when we get, maybe in subsequent updates, we can talk about a little bit adjuvanted vaccine and technology associated with Novavax. But they just started on December 30th, their phase 3 trials in the U.S. They are much farther along outside of the U.S., but they just started, and they are doing a placebo-controlled trial, and their randomization is 2-to-1, so twice as many participants will be in their vaccine arm as in the placebo arm. So just wanted to report out on some of the developments that has happened since the last time we spoke. And with that, we can go to the next slide, John. So the 2 vaccines that have been, seems like a really long time, but only the last 3-4 weeks in the US, the Pfizer and Moderna, as I mentioned, they share the same platform, so therefore one can discuss them as sort of what we say in the pharmaceutical industry as a class effect. And because they're on the same technology platform, they do have some proprietary technology that is, specific to each of the manufacturers. But what the CDC has done, which I think is really nice, is there's been much discussion about the allergenicity and allergic reactions since the vaccines have been on the market. So CDC has very nicely summarized the vaccine components or the ingredients of both Moderna's and Pfizer's vaccine. And that's what you are seeing on the screen right now is really head-to-head comparison of what those ingredients are. And it's been much in the news talked about the polyethylene glycol, which is component of the lipid nanoparticles that both vaccines share. So the nanoparticles, the lipid nanoparticles for both vaccines are, some of it is known and some of it is proprietary, so we don't have all the details of those. But the polyethylene glycol, or the PEG, is a component of both vaccines and has been implicated in the allergic reactions or the adverse events associated with that we have been observing in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. The rest of the components really are, as labeled as salt, sugar, and they comprise, part of the buffer solutions that the vaccines are, housed in, so to speak. So we can go to the next slide, John, please. So part of the reason I share the ingredient list is I wanted to share some of the clinical guidelines that CDC has updated which are specific to the allergic reaction. CDC updated the guidelines on December 30th or December 31st, a very recent last few days. When we started out with the authorization of both vaccines, there was some already observed cases of allergic reaction, but the emphasis was that, observe and monitor the individuals. But subsequent to that, since we have had some adverse events happen in the U.S., the guidelines from the CDC have become a little more restrictive, and we wanted to share that here. So rather than reading word for word, basically the guidelines are that if an individual takes the first dose and experiences any sort of allergic reaction, it does not have to be severe in nature, then that individual is recommended not to get the second dose, which is different than what the initial guidelines were. So we just wanted to call that out and make sure that there's a wide awareness of that. CDC has a very extensive and very nice summary on the links that are provided here on the management and recommendations of what medications sites should have on site as vaccination initiatives are taking place. And at very bare minimum, recommendation for once any individual gets the vaccine is observation period 15 minutes. That those that have a history of any kind of allergic reaction, it does not have to be any of the components of the vaccine, is minimum of 30 minutes. So those are some very, very important guidelines to keep in mind, and as vaccination initiatives continue to take place. The next slide, please. And this is, so we're keeping the theme of safety in mind, because we know that has been of a paramount of discussion as these vaccines have been developed and authorized. So wanted to continue this group, to update this group on all the latest development and learning associated with the safety of these both vaccines. So this is an MMWR that CDC issued just earlier this week. And granted, it's only been 3.5 weeks, so this is 2 weeks worth of data. So the vaccines were introduced first. Vaccination took place in this country on December 14th, so it's really not even full 2 weeks worth of data here. But we all know data takes a little time to catch up. But the MMWR summarized the adverse anaphylactic events that have transpired to date, which is from December 14th to December 23rd. And then there are 21 cases of anaphylactic reaction after doses administered, roughly about 1.9 million first dose Pfizer vaccine recipients. You might be wondering why Moderna is not reported in here. If you look at the time period, December 14th to 23rd, Moderna really didn't come out in providers' hands till December 22nd, December 23rd. So there just wasn't enough time. We fully anticipate the subsequent MMWRs will include Pfizer and Moderna both. So some interesting statistics out of those 21 cases, the anaphylaxis cases, onset of time was within that 30 minutes of vaccination. So that recommendation to observe individuals who have any allergic reactions for 30 minutes, it's appropriate. The most individuals who had the anaphylactic reaction, this is about 80%, had a previous history of anaphylaxis events. So that's another important thing to note. The other important note of those 21 cases is that predominantly those cases were among female, but there's an important note that it's at least 60–64% of all total vaccine recipients to date are female, so there's a higher number of females who just have received the vaccine. Therefore, it is possible that the higher number of anaphylaxis cases also observed is due to that. But again, the numbers are too small, so we will continue to monitor on how this progresses. Next slide, please. And this is our vaccine adverse reporting system, so VAER. So this is our nation's first warning system to report any kind of vaccine safety concerns that we see or any adverse event reporting system. So keeping in the theme of safety for this vaccine update. This is a report that we collect, that the DSHS collects, and along collaboration with the CDC report we get. So I wanted to provide a quick adverse event summary for where we are in Texas. And you can see that this is as of yesterday. So approximately 541,000 vaccine doses have been administered. And within that, you see about 105 adverse events reported. So the percent of adverse events occurring is very, very small, and we're very consistent, or if not slightly lower, to the overall U.S. relative to the U.S. So just wanted to provide just summary and safety data of what we know of the 3.5 weeks of vaccines being on and going into people's arms. So thank you very much. This was my last slide.
Turn to the meeting.
Hello, everyone. This is Imelda Garcia. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide, please.
Hey, Imelda, this is John Hellerstedt. While we do that, let me acknowledge that Dr. Parker has returned to the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. As I mentioned, my name is Imelda Garcia, and I am the Associate Commissioner for Laboratory and Infectious Disease Services here at the Texas Department of State Health Services. And I'm very happy to be talking with you all today to provide an update on our vaccine distribution plan. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So just as a reminder, this is one of our CDC slides that really highlights kind of where the vaccine supply is going to be heading over the next couple of months. And so we do know that right now we are still in the limited doses available, but that as the manufacturers ramp up and as more vaccines are authorized by the Food and Drug Administration, that we do anticipate the supply chain to increase over time. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is just a recap. I wanted to provide an update because, the last meeting we had shared what our overall phased approach was going to be and wanted to kind of highlight, where we are right now. And so obviously, phase 0 is October, November with a lot of our planning and provider enrollment and recruitment. We are still within phase 1 right now. And as you all may remember, this was really targeted early on for our healthcare workers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But this is where the vaccines, are directly shipped to our registered providers that are really targeting the healthcare population. We anticipated that it to occur largely in occupational healthcare settings for the majority of the vaccine during this initial phase in December, with ongoing work with provider recruitment, but also that long-term care federal program would just be kicking off. And so I'm happy to say that program did start here in Texas the last week of December, and this week they did start their second week of additional long-term care facilities across the state. So next slide. So looking forward a bit, phase 2, we're really thinking probably March before we see an increased supply in significant amounts coming to Texas. During that time, we do expect to see if we've fully vaccinated everyone that wants to be vaccinated within the phase 1. We do know that we will expect, some larger vaccine events for the broader and larger population to be occurring as that bigger supply chain really ramps up. But that we will also be using kind of specialized vaccine teams to really target, gap areas across the state. And then based on the information we have right now, Phase 3, probably, this coming summer through October, before we see a sufficient supply chain to kind of keep up with the demand. And then finally, Phase 4, just where we would expect that any provider can order the COVID-19 vaccine on their own, and that the state would no longer need to be involved in that distribution process. So y'all have, if you've been with us for the past several times, you all have seen these slides before, and wanted to kind of just reiterate kind of where we had planned to be, where we are now, and then, what does the future still look like? So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And, just as a reminder, Dr. Hellerstedt did convene an expert vaccine allocation panel. And the next several slides really highlight the important work that this group is doing. So we do have 17 members of experts from infectious disease docs, emergency management. We have elected officials on it, as well as experts in public health and other city and county representatives on it as well. Ultimately, the expert panel makes recommendations with Dr. Hellerstedt issuing final approval. And for those of you that want to see the full list, we have our website there on the slide there for you. If we can go to the next slide. Now, our guiding principles are really important for us as we move through vaccine distribution. And just to reiterate, these are things that as we talk about week-to-week allocations, the expert panel frequently goes back, okay, how does this align with our guiding principles that we first laid out? And so, first and foremost, protecting healthcare workers, protecting frontline workers, protecting vulnerable populations, mitigating health inequities, using data-driven allocations on the best information available at the time, geographic diversity, and balancing that we need access in both urban and rural settings, and transparency by sharing what those allocations are with the public and seeking that public feedback, so that way we can make adjustments in how those allocations are being made from a week-to-week basis. The next slide. Now, in December, our Phase 1A definition was really driving the allocations for December and the providers that received those doses. We have our current definition of healthcare workers here. We did tier it out, so this slide has the first tier. And then if you go to the next slide, we have the second tier healthcare worker populations. But I want to point out that while we did tier them out as a group, collectively, anyone in Phase 1A was eligible in early December and continues to be eligible today. So we won't go through all the items on this one, but did want to reiterate what the current definition is. Now let's go to the next slide. For the 1B population, now our commitment as an agency and working with our local public health partners is that we are trying to help identify those individuals 65 and older or that have medical conditions and are also on the front line, have access to the vaccines to protect them while they're on the job. We are trying to ensure that the vaccine reaches all communities, particularly those that are hardest hit and may have some health disparities that aligns with our guiding principles. And so let's go to the next slide. I really want to spend a little bit of time here in talking about the 1B definition, because the last time this group met, this wasn't out yet. And Texas definitely took a different approach than what the CDC and the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices had laid out for the next eligible population. But as an expert panel, and I can tell you that we talked about this, who was going to be next in line for several weeks and many, many meetings and many, many hours. We looked at the data, we looked at, where the burden of disease was, we looked at the outcomes, and really debated wholeheartedly what population should really go first. And at the end of the day, where Texas ended up is that we prioritize those that are the most vulnerable for severe outcomes, in that being hospitalizations and deaths, with this vaccine priority. And so we are looking at, for 1B, those that are over 65 years of age, or people that are 16 and over with at least one chronic condition that makes them at increased risk. And so if you'll notice the language on this slide, it says such as but not limited to. And so the list here on the slide is only a subset of the conditions that could potentially qualify someone to receive vaccines during this time period. These are the lists that CDC identifies as having the most data and demonstrating how they contribute to severe outcomes. But by far, there are other conditions that may make an individual at higher risk and would make them ultimately eligible within the 1B population. And so I think that our pivot away from where CDC and the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices is a significant one, but it is one that is rooted in the data. It is rooted on trying to have equity in distribution, and really trying to prioritize those that are truly most vulnerable for those severe outcomes. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Here, as we talk about vaccine allocations and our distribution plan, we talked a little bit about the populations that were eligible. And all of that information is really important. But at the end of the day, the amount of people that get vaccinated is wholly driven by the allocations that Texas receives. And so, we're highlighting here, and, we track as far as what week we're in and what vaccines are available. And so, some of you all may recall December 14th is burned into my mind as a very historic day for Texas and the U.S. as the first days that we started receiving our Pfizer vaccine. And that really was a historical moment to start having something on the offensive side to fight back against COVID-19. You'll notice on this slide, for weeks 2, 3, 4, and 5, that third row that's in red that says put in reserve for long-term care facilities. In order to start the federal program that allowed long-term care facilities to sign up to use Walgreens or CVS to do their vaccinations, the states had to give up 25% of the doses over 4 weeks to cover that population that signed up. And so because Texas didn't want to wait and to vaccinate those in our long-term care, because we do know that they are some of our most vulnerable populations and are within our 1A definition, we chose to kick this off as soon as we could. So with that commitment, our next week's allocation for week 5, so the week of the 11th, is our final allotment that is being directed to that federal long-term care initiative. And that's really, really important. It's important because that was 121,000 doses each week that was taken off the top to dedicate to that federal program. Starting in week 6, so that's the week of January 18th, we no longer have to take that 121,000 off the table. Those doses come back to us as a state for us to distribute to all of our providers here in Texas. And so without an actual increase in the overall Texas allotment, the fact that those doses come back for us to push out to all of the providers across the state is a huge win for us, and our abilities to be able to provide some more stability in week-to-week allocations for some folks, but also to ensure that we can continue to add providers in communities that haven't received it yet, but also to providers that may have just recently been approved and may not have yet received an allocation. So that's a really, really important component of this slide. The other piece on this slide that I want to spend some time on is the final line on here. And it's, you'll notice for the week of January 4th, it says second dose Pfizer allocation. And then the next column over, second dose Moderna allocation. There's been a lot of confusion out in the field about second doses. And we've heard that some providers may have withheld their initial allotments because they thought they had to use that for second doses. That is not the case. All second doses are being held back by CDC so that at the appropriate time, those doses will automatically come to those providers in either a 3 or 4 week increment, depending on which brand of vaccine they're talking about. And so this is a message that we're trying to reiterate all across the state, because their initial allotments, we want them to use every single one of those doses for all new people. As Sarosh has mentioned in previous presentations to you all, both Pfizer and Moderna allow for more than the original estimated doses to be pulled from each of those vials. So in the case of Pfizer, the original one was 5 doses. We know they can pull 6. And for Moderna, the original allotment was 10 doses per vial, and we know that they can pull up to 12. We want them to use every single dose they have to put in someone's arm. And because some of the time frames, so for these products, once you puncture the vial, those doses only are used for 6 hours. We don't want to throw those extra doses in the trash. We have told people they need to just go and grab somebody to make sure that we're using every possible dose, because a dose in an arm and in a human, in a person, is still a benefit to our community, and we don't want to just throw them away, even though that person might not individually be eligible within those initial ones. And that's because of how short that time frame is of that puncture vial. So we don't want people holding back the initial doses for second doses, because as you'll see here on this slide, it is a separate allocation that's going to come to them for those second dose individuals. So we want to reiterate that every opportunity that we have. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. On this map, we have information on our allocations over the past 4 weeks. And so you'll have, from week to week to week, you'll see how many providers were allocated during that time. So the green squares are from week 1, week 2 are the red triangles, the yellow circles are week 3, and then the blue circles are this current week that we're in for week 4. And you'll see that, with each coming week, we've had broader and broader distribution across more and more counties. At the end of week 4, we have allocated to 214 counties out of the 254. Now, just because we allocated to those counties, it doesn't mean that people outside of those counties haven't gotten vaccinated. And so one of the success stories of our distribution is that as of today, we have had people vaccinated that are residents of every single county in Texas. And so while our distribution methods may have had more, fewer counties receiving it, we have people in every county across the state that have received a COVID-19 vaccine. And so I do think that is a huge success to our local partners on the ground and the efforts and outreach and recruitment that they are doing day in and day out in order to make sure that they are making it available to the broader community as a whole. And so I do want to commend all of our providers on the ground for all the hard work that they have been doing, because it is because of their work that we're able to say that success story about individuals being vaccinated in every single county in Texas. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. A little ahead of myself there. So on the long-term care program, I do want to just highlight, so right now, 365,000 Pfizer doses have been dedicated to that long-term care program. We are continuing to work with our CDC partners at the federal level to get better information about the doses administered within that federal long-term care program. So that way we have a full visibility on all the doses that have come to Texas, even though they may not have been distributed to the providers directly here with us. So this is something that we continue to work through. The ongoing efforts, as I mentioned, they just started last week, was the first week, and they did over 300 long-term care sites. For this week, they had well over 700 long-term care sites scheduled to receive their vaccines for first dose, and that will continue as they go through the federal program for those that are registered. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, we talked about our number of healthcare workers, and so within the first 4 weeks, based on the data of healthcare workers, including some of the long-term care, we estimate about 1.6 million people eligible within the 1A. Now, I talked a little bit about what providers signed up for and the healthcare numbers that we were trying to target. So when we're talking specifically about hospitals, they had pre-booked almost 700,000 doses for healthcare workers. So they told us, I have almost 700,000 healthcare workers in our hospitals that need to be vaccinated. And that was really our target. And so when we look at allocations and why some, hospitals may get different allocations than their neighbor, it's largely driven because of the number that they had told us they needed to serve. So when we look at our allocations to those hospitals, we can show that we have hit 94% of the need, of the indicated need of those hospitals that they had told us that they needed to vaccinate within just the first 4 weeks of allocation. And so I think that is, a big success within the hospital setting for our healthcare workers. Now, in addition to those doses beyond just in the hospital setting, over 500,000 have gone to non-hospital organizations to vaccinate healthcare workers across the state. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now here's a new map that no one has really seen yet, and so I wanted to highlight this. This does have a compilation of the doses that have been shipped and received by the different provider sites all across the state, but also highlighting and trying to be able to show a comparison of the doses administered within those different counties. And so the colors tell you as far as what their allocations have been or what has been shipped and received. And then the dots and the size of the dots reflects the number of doses that are administered within each of those respective counties. And so we do have an aggregate table at the bottom for you to see as far as by public health region. And so, as of yesterday's count, we had over 541,000 individuals vaccinated across the state for COVID-19. And those numbers continue to go up every day. Let's go to the next slide. Here we have first dose and second dose. And so wanted to kind of highlight that because the second dose components are just now starting to hit. So last week was the first shipment of those second dose Pfizer allocations. And this week is the first shipments of the Moderna second dose allocations across the state. And so do want to just kind of highlight the differences within first and second doses. And I want to talk a little bit about the importance of separating them out. When we talk about doses administered and are looking at what is the uptake, how much vaccine is sitting on the shelf, it's important to take into consideration those second doses because they're not available for additional people to be vaccinated. Those second dose allocations that come as an additional shipment are specifically intended for the people that already received their initial vaccine. And so we don't want to skew the data based on those second doses starting to hit the state, because they're not for additional people. Those really need to be going to the folks that received the vaccine the first time, so that they can be fully protected with the COVID-19 vaccine. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, we've talked a lot about, kind of the initial populations and the allocations, but here recently, Dr. Hellerstedt did provide guidance to all of the providers that we want all of our providers to vaccinate not only 1A and 1B at the same time. This guidance is, we continue to reiterate it. We want to make sure everyone knows about it. We have heard from the field that there are some providers that may not have heard the message, and we need to reiterate that with them. But this is really intended to make sure that we're not leaving vaccine on the shelf. We're not waiting for someone to finally decide, oh yeah, now I really want to be vaccinated. Because while it's sitting on the shelf, it's not protecting somebody that we could have vaccinated because they wanted to be. And so this directive is to help us maximize every single dose that's currently in Texas and protect as many people as quickly as possible in order to help start trending the curve across the state. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So that is the latest information that we have based on our latest CDC information. We continue to work forward on week 6 allocations for the week of the 18th with that increased amount. We are in the process of continuing to talk through as an expert panel additional populations for 1C and beyond. But it's important to note that the numbers that Texas get is really what's driving how many people we can vaccinate at any given time. And as Texas, we're trying to employ different strategies to be able to target our most vulnerable populations and those at greatest risk. And we will continue to receive feedback, not only from the task force members, from the public, from our local and community partners, not only in how we're allocating, but also in the strategies moving forward. And so really want to reiterate that it's important to have that feedback loop from everyone, and comments, concerns, and criticisms are all welcome, because at the end of the day, we are trying to do the best possible effort to protect Texas from COVID-19. We know it's going to be a marathon. We know we don't have all the vaccine we want right now, but we're getting more every single week, and we will continue to share that information, communicate broadly, and work with our local community partners on the ground to make sure we're doing the best possible efforts to get everyone vaccinated. So with that, Dr. Hellerstedt, I'll turn it back over to you.
Dr. Sheila Haley. Hi, I just want to acknowledge that Dr. Sheila Haley is now part of the meeting. This is John Hellerstedt, and again, I apologize for having been called away abruptly. I'm back. So we're a little bit out of order, and one of the things I notice is that we have not paused for discussion among the task force members after each presentation, which we will want to do. But unless I hear a loud chorus of objection, what I'm going to do is go ahead and go through my summary, and then we will entertain, again, comments and discussion among the entire task force, and then open up to public comment. And I think, we're probably talking about my presentation of maybe 10 minutes, and then 30 minutes for discussion, just not any hard timelines, but just to kind of give a framework, and then we'll be able to go forward from there with the rest of the agenda. So if you don't mind, I believe this is the presentation. Let's have the next slide. So I want to give the COVID-19 updates. Obviously, we're huge. This has had an incredible impact globally. It's had an incredible impact nationally, as well as on the state of Texas. Here's a timeline. I won't really do anything but highlight a few things. We had our first lab confirmed case there on March 17th. We opened up the State Medical Operations Center even earlier than that on January 31st. I declared a public health disaster on March 19th, and then we had our expert vaccine allocation panel meet in October of 2020. I have a special debt of gratitude to the EVAP, the Expert Vaccine Allocation Panel. It's a 17-member panel. It has very broad representation, including licensed healthcare professionals, members of the senior members of the Texas legislature, folks with public health experience, and a lot of those categories I'm naming really sort of overlap. And they, what my instruction to them really was, you're knights of the round table. There is no rank amongst the members of the expert vaccine allocation panel, because they're all there to bring a particular expertise and perspective to the discussion. They have worked very, very hard. They have met for many, many hours, and as Imelda outlined, have done a great job. I should call out Imelda as well and say that I think no one has ever had to solve more problems than Imelda Garcia, and the state really owes her a debt of gratitude in being able to deal with every crucial aspect of the pandemic as it's come down so far. And of course now we're in the vaccine era, which is a very good place to be, but until the day comes when every willing person in Texas has been vaccinated, we're going to have to watch this very carefully and adapt to make sure that we are doing the very best by both individuals and Texas as a state. Next slide, please. Here is a very interesting slide. This is on the top there. You can see new cases per day, and that's really cases that are discovered by testing. And you can see we had a kind of a peak of that back in the summer, peaking in between July and August there, then a sort of a diminution, and then since the October, we've had a steady rise in the number of cases. We are in fact testing more, but I think that you can think of those new cases as truly being proportionate to what's going on out there in the field. The CDC has said that for every confirmed test that you get, and really in my mind it's not only the PCR testing now, but the antigen testing that seems to be quite specific and sensitive. You take that total number and multiply it by 5, and that's probably the number of people who really have had it in the state. So there's more, but it's still not enough to convert herd immunity. And so the best way, the most ethical way, and the fastest way to get to herd immunity is really going to be through the vaccination program, to have that active immunity against COVID-19. On the bottom, you can see the fatalities, and again, you can see that there's something of a lagging indicator. In other words, people get diagnosed, and then it's a process of days or weeks. Usually then they're in the hospital and their disease progresses, and then when they have a fatal outcome, that's a period of time after they've often acquired the infection and after the time they've been diagnosed. So next slide. Here you can see one of the things that we look at most closely, the scale of the chart. I think maybe underplays a little bit the dramatic changes that we're seeing. On the top, you see the number of general beds total that are occupied by COVID, and on the bottom, you see the number of intensive care unit beds that are occupied. I think that bottom one is, in a sense, more striking. All along, our primary strategic goal has been to preserve the ability of our healthcare system, particularly our inpatient hospital system, to care for anybody and everybody, including COVID-19 patients, who needs inpatient level care. And of course, we have stretched incredibly to increase that capacity by providing this at state expense now close to 10,000 staff, nurses in particular, but some physicians, respiratory therapists, and technicians of that kind to hospitals all over the state in order to maintain that capacity. But in the end, things like the intensive care unit can only be expanded so much. And you might look at this and say, well, okay, I mean, you know, there's some there, but there's so many more other beds. Why are we worried? Why are we concerned? Well, the reason is that even though we have COVID-19, we still have women giving birth to babies that come into the hospital. We have appendicitis, we have car crashes, we have strokes and heart attacks and things like that that are emergent things that cannot be postponed in the care. So, and some of those are going to require that very, very precious intensive care unit space. So when we start to see these trends, as you can see them here, that's why we try and send out the word to the trauma service areas that we have here in Texas, that when COVID patients occupy 15% or more of the total beds in those trauma service areas for 7 days in a row, then we want to cut back on the social interaction. And the way that we can do that is by communicating with the public, but also demonstrating that we want to close bars and cut back on certain retail establishments from 75% occupancy to 50% occupancy. And so we've been doing that more than we have in the past. Texas, as of today, was approaching 14,000 COVID patients in the hospital, and the highest peak that we had back in the summer was around 10,800 or so. So it's a significantly more, and we have to continue to observe the non-pharmaceutical interventions, as we call them. So in other words, the physical social distancing, literally getting out of range of transmitting the COVID-19 virus, masking, which greatly diminishes the effective range of the virus, and the hand washing and disinfecting commonly touched surfaces. All of those have contributed, all of them work. One of the biggest signs that it's working is the fact that we're having less, a very mild flu season. So the things we've been doing are effective against respiratory virus spread. We just need to keep them up and keep them up at a level that is going to allow us to really bend the curve. You know, really though, I think at this point, one of the things is that a lot of transmission is taking place in homes, in private gatherings, in the kind of parties and gatherings that people really want to have during the holiday season. Can't blame them for it. We all want that sort of thing. But the hidden danger is the fact that we now know, which we didn't at the beginning of the pandemic, we now know that asymptomatic individuals, people with no symptoms who feel great, but are in fact infected, not only infected with the virus, but are also contagious. And folks in that category may unwittingly be spreading the virus, and the CDC says that perhaps 80% of the spread is due to that. So let's look at the next slide. Here you can see again the lab confirmed patients in the hospital rising up. The last one we have there is January 5th, and let's look at the next slide. There are roles in the pandemic, coordination, management of the testing lab and capacity, data collection and analysis, health system support, public awareness, etc., sourcing and allocating therapeutics and medication. Actually, Texas is doing a really a pretty good job comparatively with getting out therapeutics, and we're very proud of that. Those are the monoclonal antibodies, and et cetera. So next slide. We again, here is some of our output, if you will, the state of Texas assistance requests. You can read the numbers there. That's an enormous number. That all goes out through our state medical operations center. Those folks work 7 days a week, sometimes close to 24 hours a day, in looking at these calls and looking at these requests and having conversations with the requesters so that we understand what it is exactly that they want and what is the purpose, and to assure that those precious resources are being allocated where they're needed. You can see the call center calls and then the contact tracing. Next slide. Here's the expenditures, big numbers, and that, well, we ain't done yet. So the bottom line, as you can see there, $2.5 billion. The vast majority of that is in the medical staffing that I mentioned earlier. Next slide. Here's our website. We're very proud of it. There's a real wealth of information there. I would direct you to that, www.dshs.texas.gov/coronavirus. And you can go in there and navigate around that landing page to find all sorts of other information about therapeutics, testing, vaccine allocation. Next slide. We're looking at an improved case count dashboard. Next slide. And again, improved hospitalization dashboard. Next slide. This is our vaccine webpage, and of course, right now, vaccine is the thing that people are most interested in. I think everyone is aware that leading up to this pandemic, in normal times, if you will, there was some concern that there was an increasing amount of vaccine hesitancy out there. Folks were worried and, in my opinion, misunderstood the risk-benefit ratio of the vaccines, so greatly favoring benefit. Now, in the situation with COVID, we're seeing, I think, a lot of vaccine eagerness, if you will. We're seeing that people really want to be vaccinated, and I really want them to be vaccinated, and so does every leader that I've spoken to and every person who works in public health. Ultimately, the vaccine is going to be the thing that will halt the advance of COVID-19, and as Imelda Garcia called it, we can play offense now with the vaccine. So you can learn about our allocation plan, the panel, the vaccine provider enrollments, et cetera, and we intend to only increase and make that more user-friendly and provide more information there. Next slide. Here's our vaccine dashboard. This is kind of old. You see the number there, 377050 for vaccines administered. Really, the latest data that we have, I'm not even sure it's refreshed yet on today's live website, but we're up over, I think it's 614,000 plus. That's a total of the first dose plus the second dose, although the second dose is only somewhere around 25,000 already, which is normal at this point. But we're constantly improving every aspect of getting the vaccine out to people. So we're improving the way in which we can measure the vaccine and where it's been delivered and how much, and what's been administered to folks and how much. So we know that going forward, we need to have that level of information in order to make the best possible allocations. But right now, as Imelda said, it's really the only true waste of a vaccine is a vaccine that doesn't get administered in a timely manner or has to be wasted due to other technical factors. Next slide. This is our provider location map. Again, we hope that it'll become even more functional as the future goes on, to help steer people in a way to a vaccine provider near them. Next slide. We're really trying to drive interest in vaccine. Here's some of the information that you can see that we've gathered from our market research, and let's just go on to the next slide. Here's a little bit about our campaign, Bilingual Naturally. We talk about safety and effectiveness and help people navigate who, how, and when to get the vaccine, addressing vaccine hesitancy, especially among certain high-risk populations. That continues to be a concern that we have, encouraging the masking. The ongoing campaign, as you can see, will include many different media of communication, and we do have a vaccine communication toolkit there that's on our webpage. Next slide. And again, here's some more of the general communication tools, and I would refer you to this presentation for that. And next slide. There's some of our vaccine preventioning methods. The woman you see there pictured is Dr. Jennifer Shuford. She is the infectious disease officer for the state of Texas, and has also worked extremely hard and is a true expert. She is now our chief state epidemiologist. So next slide, I believe, is the last. I want to thank everybody. I do want to say a little bit more before we go to discussion among the task force members about our vaccine allocation strategy. As Imelda Garcia referenced, we have departed somewhat significantly from the recommendations of the CDC and the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, in that we are really using age and underlying medical conditions as the keys to the so-called phase 1B. In other words, that next group of people. That is, in Texas, when you look at who that represents, that may be a third of the population of Texas. So that is by no means a small group of people. That's millions of people. And if you cut across and look at that and the way we've allocated it, I'm very supportive of it. I'm very proud of that, because it's really person-centric. In other words, it looks at the individual person and says, what is the risk to this individual of either acquiring a disease or having a serious outcome from the disease? And to me, that would be something like requiring hospitalization or losing your battle against, losing your life to COVID-19. And so by identifying the populations the way we have, we're really being quite inclusive of all of the other factors that we worry about. In other words, health disparities. By including those underlying medical conditions, we know that those underlying medical conditions are more common in underserved populations in the state. And so we think that this is a very natural way to look at the needs of the individual, look at the circumstance of the individual, and yet serve the interests of public health and the common good. And the way in which we've identified it, I think, is you know, most people, especially with the age piece, most people have identification. It's very easy to prove their age. Let me give you a counter example. If we went by, say, employment, folks in construction are considered to be essential employees, as are other folks. What makes more sense to Texas, to the general public? What makes more sense? Getting it to someone who has an underlying medical condition and it really has impaired health and is at risk for severe disease or death, or getting it to a healthy 25-year-old who happens to work in a particular occupation? To me, the bioethical choice is quite clear, and that is really the foundation for how we have approached the vaccine priorities in Texas. And again, as Imelda said, though, the only real waste of a vaccine is a vaccine that doesn't get that gets delayed in administration, or for whatever reasons it has to be discarded because it's run out of time, so to speak. So I'll stop there, and I would invite the members of the task force to have a question and discussion.
Dr. Halsey, I have one question for Dr. Saroj Rai, that she had shown 5 cases who had adverse reaction and 1 death. So what was the cause for the death?
I believe that that's still being looked at. I can tell you from what I know about it, this was an extremely frail individual, if you will, potentially moribund, even at the point at which they received the vaccine. So I would withhold my judgment as to whether or not there was any true causal relationship between the vaccine and that individual's death.
Thank you. The other one is regarding indications for phase 1B. That says type 2 diabetes on 16 years onwards. I think that it should be type 1 diabetes also, because 16 years onwards we have many type 1 diabetes. So they should be included in phase 1B.
Let me give you two ways to answer that. One is we will certainly convey that to the expert vaccine advisory panel. I do not sit in on their deliberations because I want them to, again, be knights of the round table, and I don't want to unduly influence any of the exchange of ideas that takes place there, but we'll certainly refer your recommendation to them. So as far as formally including type 1 diabetes, I will tell you, though, I really think that the list that we have included as medical conditions in type 1B is inclusive. It is not exclusive. So in other words, I think it would be perfectly within the judgment of someone providing the vaccine to say, yes, this 17-year-old type 1 diabetic is someone who qualifies for 1B category.
That makes sense. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
This is Jim LeDuc at UTMB. I wonder if I could ask a question on Imelda's presentation, also on the 1B classification. Sure. Specifically, I see that we've listed pregnancy as a condition. I'm questioning if, in fact, that means that the state is now recommending that pregnant women receive the vaccine. And I raise this because on recent reading of the Pfizer vaccine, they were basically silent on recommendations, saying that there was insufficient information to justify recommending or not the vaccine among pregnant women. Thank you.
I think that's a great question, and I'll call upon Imelda to elaborate or correct anything that I say that she disagrees with. But the list to me, again, is not a list of recommendations. The list is a list of categories of people that we would want to have a priority in terms of the vaccine administration. So the vaccine administration really should always take place in a setting where that individual has sufficient informed consent. And just as the language of the Food and Drug Administration's emergency use authorization says, it's authorized because the known potential benefits outweigh the known potential risks. So I think for any pregnant woman, that's a very personal decision, and it's meant to be permissive to put, in other words, pregnant women are excluded rather, from receiving the vaccine, but rather it's permissive. But we would still want it to be a matter of medical and personal judgment.
John, this Peter Hotez and Jim, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, ACOG, has come out very strongly in favor of recommending vaccination of pregnant women, and now the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine as well, just because of the morbidity and mortality of COVID-19 in pregnancy. And in the fact that during the phase 3 trial, a number of women became pregnant with no obvious untoward effects, and it's not a live virus vaccine. So I think for now, the thinking is the risk, as you point out, John, the risks of COVID-19 during pregnancy are so devastating that the decision for now is to recommend vaccinating.
Right. When I laid that out, did I lay it out backwards? So it's that the known potential benefits outweigh the known potential.
No, you said it right. I thought.
Okay.
No, I think you said it right.
All right.
Yeah.
I need another cup of coffee.
Thank you both. That's very helpful.
John, can I make a...
This is David. Dr. Hunter, this is David Slayton. Could you just speak to the vaccine hubs that were announced yesterday by DSHS? And I know there's going to be more information over the weekend or early next week, but is there any information you could share with us about that right now?
Sure. And then after that, I think, Peter, you had a question, correct? So the vaccine hubs are really part of essentially our strategic goal at this point, which is to use all the vaccine that we can to still observe the priority populations that we've identified, but to use all the vaccine that we can. And by looking at the hubs, we're looking at places that have been able to show and organize themselves in such a way that they can vaccinate lots of people safely in a very short period of time, and essentially put the vaccine to the very best use. So we'll have more on that coming forward. But it is a difficult decision, because it's a decision that we have to make in the context of the overall scarcity of the vaccine. But to say to ourselves, again, every vaccine that's given provides a potential benefit to the individual, but also a potential benefit to public health and to the entire community. And so, COVID-19 is a respiratory virus. It's spread from person to person. And so in those communities, those bigger urban communities, you've got higher population density and therefore sort of de facto a more social interaction that could lead to the spread of COVID. So, again, it's based on the idea that we want to have a geographic spread for folks for the vaccine to make it available. That's going to become more and more available, again, as Imelda pointed out, in week 6 in particular, when we no longer have to set aside a substantial fraction of our vaccine for the special initiative that is run mostly by the federal government for vaccinating folks in nursing homes and their staff. So it's a very conscious decision to get it done, to get the vaccine in arms. We still want to observe those priority populations, but we want to also give the vaccine to entities that are organized around efficient mass vaccination. Peter?
Yes, thanks so much, and thanks for everyone for the great presentations. One of the things that I'm starting to think about is, what's the long-range game here over the course of 2021? And, looking at the population of Texas, which is approaching 30 million, we had done some studies with a group at City University, New York, modeling that says you need to vaccinate around 75% of the population in order to think about using a vaccination strategy to interrupt transmission. And given the fact that, we're relying heavily on vaccination for that purpose, the numbers we're looking at is roughly saying we're going to vaccinate 24 million Texans by towards the end of the summer, say by September 1. And this is going to be really daunting when you think about it. 24 million Texans over the next 8 months, just some back of the envelope calculations, that's 3 million Texans a month, 100,000 Texans a day, and some of the vaccines are 2 doses. Maybe the J&J will be a single dose, maybe some of the others. So multiply times 1.5, you get to 150,000 Texans a day. And so I'm starting to think down the line, let's say when we meet in SA again in a few months, what do we really need to do to get 150,000 Texans a day vaccinated? And I think the pharmacy chains are doing the best they can, and HEB. I don't think they're going to be adequate for this, and the hospital systems, and how we make this a more high throughput process is something we're going to have to give a lot of thought to, and whether take a look at those hubs and maybe even some of the outdoor stadiums we're going to need for that purpose. I think we've never really done adult vaccinations on this kind of scale, at least not that I can remember. Maybe Jim can remember a time or when we've done something like this, but I can't remember when we've had to vaccinate something on this scale, 150,000 people a day across the state of Texas. So I think creating hubs. I also think sooner rather than later, we're going to have to make the criteria less fussy and liberalize it and make it easy. I think one of the things we've learned in 2020 across the nation is our health system just cannot do complicated things. We just can't. We have to keep it very, this was true of the diagnostic testing and the lack of genomic sequencing and so many, and missing the entry of the virus from Europe into New York. If we're going to do 150,000 Texans a day, we've got to keep it really simple. And so, I actually like the fact that you jumped over the ACIP 1B and went to 1C. But I think soon after that, we're going to have to look at pretty much giving vaccine to anyone who wants it, if we're going to do that kind of high throughput. If you have to do complicated screening or ask the pharmacists in pharmacies to do that kind of screening, it's just going to be too complicated. And I just think the simpler the system we have, the better. We already have the complication of keeping people hanging around for 15 minutes after they get vaccinated to look for allergic reactions. So what I think we need to look for as a state, maybe the task force can look into this, is, all right, what do we really need to do to achieve our long-term goal? Long-term meaning by, early in the fall, late in the summer, of 24 million Texans, and have some realistic plan. I also think it's clear we're not going to be able to rely exclusively on the mRNA vaccines. I think the technology is just not robust enough. It's too immature in order to produce at that scale. So it's also clear we're going to have the FDA get up some of the other vaccines, the AstraZeneca and the J&J adenovirus, the particle vaccine. I mean, we've got a recombinant protein vaccine that we're scaling up now in India that's pretty high throughput, keep bringing that in place. But I think these are the kinds of things, I understand the discussion today is how we operate over the next few weeks, but eventually we're going to have to pick up momentum to the point where we're going to need to do something on an incredibly high throughput scale, and how we achieve that's going to be really important. So I'd be curious to hear what the others have thoughts on things along those lines.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I do think it will be, I like the KISS principle, which I think is what you've outlined. When we've gone to this next phase, part of the way to do it was to try and keep it a little simpler. But I think your point's well taken, and I would love to hear what others think about how to scale up to something that's utterly unprecedented.
Hi, Commissioner Hellerstedt.
Howdy.
Hi, Christy Murray. I think first what I want to say is, as someone who is on the receiving end of the vaccine, just how well everything went, and communication, allocation, the expediency was just fantastic. Had my second dose yesterday and I feel great. Only way I notice I have a vaccine is when I poke my arm and it is a little bit sore, but that's it. So just thank you for everything that you guys have done there at the state. It really has been fantastic, and I know it's a monumental feat, and you guys have been handling it incredibly well. I think in terms of Peter's comment, one of the things that we could always consider, especially thinking of underserved communities, alternative places for vaccination, like schools, where you have a school pretty much in every single community, fire stations, things like that, where maybe not quite your traditional doctor's office, but something else that could be another mechanism for getting the vaccine out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, this is Sheila Haley. I sent a email a couple of days ago to the commissioner and to someone else. I know you're busy and probably haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, but I am a registered nurse, a nursing professor for many, many years, and I had the idea that if we went to churches, especially when you talk about the African American community, I am African American, churches would be an ideal place to get some vaccinations done. And I also proposed that we went to a method where we did screening through an app, and when the client showed up, just have them stick their arm out of the car, get the vaccination, and have them sit 15 minutes in their car. Of course, we would have people to be monitoring them, or have them to go inside of the church if they were lightheaded or felt uncomfortable and maybe had some light refreshments. This is just a rough idea that's been going through my mind on how I can get involved and how I can help. I recently retired, and I'm just feeling like I need to do something. I am honored to be on this task force, but again, I do hold the Texas State registered nurse license, and I need to be getting more involved.
Well, thank you, Ms. Halley. I really appreciate your comments. I couldn't agree more that faith-based organizations are a great outreach. I think they're a great outreach to every community, but especially some communities that may have a vaccine hesitancy or be traditionally underserved. Obviously, where folks are members of those churches, those faith-based organizations, they have faith and trust in them. And if those become part of the way in which vaccine is promoted in those communities, I think it would be very successful. Really, though, I think intrinsic or implied, at least, in what we've been talking about so far and in what Associate Commissioner Garcia was talking about, we don't have the wherewithal, frankly, at the state level to organize what happens on a local level. I was in a meeting today with NIMKID, who is our emergency management, the chief of the Texas Division of Emergency Management, and he made the comment that the way these things happen is on the local scale. So I would very much urge that if those faith-based organizations want to reach out to entities that they know that are receiving the vaccine and cooperate and collaborate with them in a way, I think that would be great, and vice versa. If there are organizations that are receiving the vaccine and want to reach out to any group in a civic group or faith-based group in the community to try and promote awareness and to recruit people, I think that will be the key to success. As far as the operational things about putting folks through, drive-in clinics and stuff, I've talked to one hospital system here in Austin in particular. I'm not saying this is the final word on all of this, but when they looked at that, they really thought it made more sense to have something more traditional that would be indoors. Because a person in a room takes up a whole lot less space than a person in a car, even if you've got a car full of people. And you want to maintain safety, and you want to maintain proper ability to provide vaccine no matter what the setting is. And one of the things one of the reasons for the 15-minute observation is not just the usual kind of thing that you see a lot, where people get lightheaded, but we're talking about people who have very serious and potentially life-threatening allergic reactions, anaphylaxis. That's very rare, but when it does occur, it is something that requires immediate administration of certain types of medication and immediate skilled ability to resuscitate the person and then refer them on to have more, often to go to the emergency room and have more definitive care. Sometimes you give a shot of epinephrine that helps a little while, it doesn't last long, and if the person is still having a strong reaction, they may need additional treatment over a longer period of time. So I think there's a lot of promise, a lot of potential in the ideas that you brought forward, and I think we'll just have to see which of those things becomes the most practical way to do it. Again, with the understanding that it really is the local folks who have been successful so far in pulling together these organizations of creating these hubs and getting really high numbers of vaccines going. So thank you for your thoughts.
You're welcome.
Other folks, comments on anything that we've said and done?
Hey, Commissioner, this is Dr. Lozzi from El Paso, Texas, and thank you for this great presentation and in-depth information that you've given. I will say one thing, and maybe El Paso is a little bit different than Houston, Dallas, but listening to Dr. Hotez, maybe not. In as much as we've sent, and I understand the priority in getting our colleagues, healthcare workers, in that sort of first line, vaccines first, historically, hospitals are really bad at doing anything related to public health. And so as we see more and more doses come into the El Paso region at the hospitals, a lot of these hospitals are struggling with how do they create that community-wide public health infrastructure. And so I think that you've already had a meeting with our delegation out of El Paso. I know Imelda Garcia was on that as well. And anything that can be done to get those vaccines to the public health department alongside the pieces that are already going to be going to Walgreens and CVS, I think would be immense, alongside the federally qualified health centers, because they know how to do public health. They know how to get things out. And I think even then, they're not going to have enough spread. And thinking around alternative care sites and other things will be important. I do have a question. This comes from the El Paso County Medical Society. How is the decision made to give a certain private practice versus another private practice? And so there's a host of private practices in the El Paso area that have started to get vaccine, and other sort of larger practices haven't yet. And so that question has come up, and thank you for your response.
Thank you, Dr. Lozzi. So first of all, in terms of the hospitals, you're absolutely right, and certainly my colleagues who are hospital executives here in Austin, before I was commissioner, I was a physician executive in the hospital system here, they would agree with you completely. Again, remember the history. The history was that we wanted to do healthcare workers first, the people who were actually facing the COVID positive patient, so that they uniquely, among any other group of people, had an absolute 100% certain risk of exposure in their everyday duties. And so we wanted to protect them as part of the ability to maintain them on the job, so that they weren't getting sick and having to go home or that sort of thing. So that's part of the history. But yes, you're absolutely right. They've made, my hospital administration colleagues have made it very abundantly clear that what you said is exactly true, which is hospitals aren't really used to being mass immunization hubs. Having said that, the one hospital system I'm familiar with has worked with the other hospital systems in town and public health and other partners to help organize and collaborate and convene around that idea, so that they hopefully then will be passing off the operational details to another organization that has all the proper elements that you're talking about. So that was one, and I'm sorry, remind me what the second question was about. Physician practices. We only give vaccine to people who sign up and ask for it and tell us who they're going to vaccinate, number one. So it may be that some of the practices that got it were earlier in there and had had a specific population that they were going to serve that was in the 1A, 1B category. The other thing to remember is, again, we're still in a matter of scarcity. So there are definitely places that if we had enough vaccine, we would be providing them with a supply of vaccine. But as of right now, we don't. We can't have it. So the allocation that we've gotten is really going to pick back up significantly in that week 6, when we no longer have to have a set aside for the federal long-term care vaccination program. Imelda, do you want to add anything to that?
Dr. Hellerstedt, I think you answered it correctly. Dr. Lozzi, so first and foremost, the timing of their approval and the process. So whether or not they were approved sooner versus later. I think the other piece is the number that they said that they had. And so within the different week distributions, we've been trying to alternate whether, we're sending a lot to pharmacies and then a lot to other healthcare and then a lot, a significant portion back to pharmacies and stuff. And so if they haven't yet received vaccine allocations, they're welcome to reach out to me. And we can add them to kind of our watch list. But, largely it's the timing of their approval and what numbers they said that they had to vaccinate. And so those are probably the two biggest things that would impact the timing of when a private practice would receive vaccine or not.
All right, thank you very much.
This is Dr. Varma. Can I make a comment regarding hospitals? Traditionally, it may be correct, but right now what I have seen, that we have two major hospitals in Lubbock, Texas. Both have risen to the occasion and they are doing a fantastic job.
Dr. Hellerstedt, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Oh, that's too bad. I said the smartest things I've ever said in my life, so and now I can't remember them. But anyhow, that's a joke. Your point being that there are some hospitals that are doing a great job. Yes, absolutely true. They're doing very good numbers. They're using the vaccine that we're giving them. But again, many of them are rightfully following the phase 1A population, which is a group, they're largely their employees and then their medical staff or contractors or people who are in that environment. So that's a group of people that it's natural for them to be able to reach out to, work with, schedule, and be very organized. And so some places have done a tremendous job. But as we move from to the ever widening concentric circles of who we want to vaccinate, yes, there will always still be some 1A folks, I think, around. As I believe it was Imelda's or maybe Dr. Rice figures, we don't even think we're necessarily halfway through 1A yet, or at least all healthcare workers. So there'll probably always be that. And it goes back to what Dr. Hotez said. We have to keep it simple. We have to let it be kind of fuzzy. We have to let some of these lines kind of overlap. But yes, there are hospitals that have done a tremendous job with the initial allotments that we've had. But I think the sense that I'm getting from our conversation, and I would agree, is that there are other phases of vaccine administration that are going to require an entirely more robust distribution and administration system. Other comments? thank you all for your participation. Yes.
Hi, this is Louise Joy, and I'm a healthcare attorney in Texas and work with healthcare providers all over the state. And I did have some questions that deal with the specifics of distribution of the vaccine. And the first one was...
Are you a member of the task force?
No.
No.
No, I'm not. I didn't know if we had gotten to that point yet.
I need
Okay.
to.
Not quite yet, Ms. Joy.
Okay, thank you.
This is Dr. Hellerstedt. Any other discussion, comments from members of the task force? No. If not, Mr. Chacon, are we ready to go to public comment? Have I discharged all of the other agenda points?
Yes, Dr. Hellerstedt. All agenda items have already been covered. We are on agenda item number 6, which is public comment. And we do have 3 members of the public that registered to provide oral public comment. But before I call on them, I would like to read the following public comment announcement. And it reads as follows. The Texas Open Meetings Act provides the opportunity for the public to address task force members. It also determines what is allowed during that public comment. The Act states that the general public can address task force members about concerns. Members are allowed to ask the person commenting to clarify something already said. Members or staff may provide a factual response or identify a policy that applies to the comments made. Members and staff cannot discuss a comment topic unless it's already on the current agenda. If the comment topic is on the current agenda, consideration for discussion should be given as to whether the comments are within the charge of the task force and whether time allows for discussion to take place. If the comment topic is within the task force charge, but the topic is not on the current agenda, members or staff can request that the topic be placed on the agenda for the next meeting. As a reminder, confidential information should not be shared. In order to ensure that all business is able to be conducted within the timeframes allowed and that everyone who would like to comment has that opportunity, there is a 3-minute time limit per person. One of our producers will keep time, and at the 2-minute mark, you will hear a ringtone indicating you have 1 minute remaining. After your time has expired, you will be asked to conclude your presentation. And at this time, Dr. Hellerstedt.
John, you're muted. We didn't hear the rest of that.
There I go again. Mr. Chacon, I know we have some written and some oral comments that folks have signed up for. So what is the proper way to proceed?
I'm sorry, somebody muted me there at the end. I'm sorry. In any case, we do have 3 members that are registered to provide oral comment. We did have written comment, and all task force members received that. But Dr. Salehi is going to go ahead and provide oral comments and talk on her talking points of her written comments. So we won't have to read any written comments today. So at this time, Dr. Hellerstedt, I will call on Ms. Lois Joy.
Louise Joy, yes.
Louise Joy, yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
You may make your presentation.
Okay, thank you. I am a healthcare attorney in Texas, and I have been practicing here since 1991. I work with hospitals all over the state and all over the country. A couple things about what's been going on with the vaccine distribution that we had some questions about was, first of all, when the effort was made to go from 1A to 1B so quickly, the hospitals weren't really ready for the 1B individuals to be receiving vaccinations. And so the question was, how much effort was put into notifying them of that? Because my clients contacted me with the fact that they were shut down by the phone calls that they received. And currently, the map that we have for the state of Texas tells people who has gotten vaccine, but doesn't tell you that there really is available vaccine. So it creates a real problem for people thinking that vaccine is available, but it's not. I mean, I think having that map would be really good if it told you about vaccine that was available. So right now, that doesn't help.
Hi, this is Dr. Hallerstadt. You know, we've taken your question, we've recorded it, and we will refer it to appropriate folks to get back to you with a response.
Okay. One other question I have is, since every single vaccine, every single individual who receives vaccine has to be in the MTRAC system, do we know if the vaccines that have been reported have actually been made it to the MTRAC system? So that I also am hearing from clients that they have administered vaccines, but the system is not showing the correct information about the administration. So we actually maybe have done a better job than we think we've done because the information is not there about vaccines that have been administered, because I think there may be issues with the MTRAC system.
I don't think there are really issues with the MTRAC system per se. We are reaching out to providers to make sure that they understand how to correctly enter the data. So for instance, if they use the wrong identification code to report their COVID vaccine, if they use the same identification code they use for other vaccines, it doesn't get tallied in the COVID. So there are some operational pieces of the MTRAC system and our relationship with the providers that we're working on to improve, to get to exactly the state that you're talking about, the ideal state where we have as close to real-time data on the actual administration.
Okay. And then lastly, for the MTRAC system, is there any way for the MTRAC system to allow individuals to pre-register themselves?
No.
Because that may be one of the things that Dr. Hotez is getting to, is how do you expedite and streamline your processes? Because the whole registration process in and of itself is a difficult one to get individuals into the system.
I appreciate your question and your perspective.
Okay. And last one, is there any ability to redistribute from one entity who receives vaccine to another? So if you've got a hospital that receives vaccine and they want to redistribute to a home health agency that could go out and be administering vaccinations to individuals in their home who are homebound.
Yes, but they have to fill out a form. Both the donor and the recipient, if you will, both have to be registered in our system as folks that qualify to handle and administer the vaccine. And they need to notify us, and if they give us the proper notice and it's appropriate, we can approve that transfer.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Thank you. I appreciate everything y'all are doing.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Beth Stalvey.
That's correct.
Yes, hello.
Howdy.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this committee today. I am Dr. Beth Stalvey, Executive Director for the Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities. TCDD thanks the members of this committee for all of your efforts to protect Texans during this pandemic. TCDD is a state agency established by state and federal law and led by 27 governor-appointed board members, 60% of whom are individuals with developmental disabilities that I will refer to as DD, and their family members. The role of TCDD is to advocate for responsive policies and programs to allow Texans with DD the opportunity to live, work, and contribute to the community of their choice. TCDD also serves as a partner and resource to our state government colleagues in serving individuals with DD. As mentioned before, I have also submitted written comments in addition to this testimony right now. My purpose in speaking to you all today is really threefold. First, to ensure that you have received recent research findings indicating that people with DD are at higher risk for death and disability due to COVID-19 and experience health inequities within our system of care. A recent white paper that I shared in my written submission demonstrated that across all age groups, people with developmental disorders had the highest odds of dying from COVID-19. And similarly, people with intellectual disabilities had the third highest risk of COVID-19 death. Just yesterday, the Centers for Disease Control added individuals with Down syndrome among their increased risk category. Second, as we have heard today, individuals with DD who reside in residential settings, such as state-supported living centers, intermediate care facilities, and smaller community group settings, are already included in the state's priority vaccination groups. And we appreciate that Texas has included direct service professionals who serve as frontline essential role in maintaining the health and safety of people with DD. I hope that you will also consider other high-risk individuals who are working and who are residing at home with family and other caregivers coming and going from their homes. And finally, we acknowledge that this may be a less understood population to some, and TCDD is here to not only represent their elevated risk during a pandemic, but to serve as a resource and partner to you in your efforts. TCDD might help share state information about vaccine plans with individuals and families by connecting with our diverse network of organizations and disability experts at local, state, and national levels. TCDD is also available to assist in preparing educational materials in preferred formats for individuals with IDD to support the informed consent process and other messages that you may have. I appreciate your consideration of these points, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salvi, for your comments. And
John, could I also respond to that?
Yes, please. Who's speaking?
This is Peter Hotez.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I really appreciated that last comment. Let me tell you why. I have 4 adult kids, and my youngest daughter, Rachel, has autism and intellectual disabilities. And the impact of COVID-19 has been huge in terms of employment and goodwill in places like that, and also the issue around group homes. And basically, my wife, Ann, basically tells me every day I need to do more to be advocating for the impact of COVID-19 on people with developmental disabilities. So I'm very sensitive to this issue and really appreciated the comment. And I'd be more than happy to follow up with you personally if you'd like to talk about more we can do to advocate for this, because it never gets mentioned. I do what I can, but it really does not get mentioned to the level it should be. The COVID-19 is having a huge effect, not only on employment, but how it's affecting group homes. And there's just so many dimensions to this. So happy to follow up. If John, if you could provide a mechanism to link us, the two of us, would be happy to do that.
I would appreciate that as well, and I believe my email and phone number were included in the written letter I submitted, if you have that.
Terrific.
Thank you. This is Dr. Hellerstedt. We do have your written testimony, and we'll share it with your permission, which I'm hearing you're giving. We'll share that information with Dr. Hotez. And we do very much appreciate your comments. And as you pointed out, Texas has recognized folks with developmental disabilities as being included in the Group 1B.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Mr. Chicon, does that conclude our public comment section?
Dr. Hellerstedt, we have one other member that's wanting to provide the oral comment. And at this time, let me call on Ms. Diane Rhodes.
Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment. My name is Diane Rhodes, and I'm Senior Policy Manager with the Texas Dental Association. TDA thanks the members of this task force, the EVAP, and DSHS as it continues facilitating COVID vaccine distribution and providing vaccine education to healthcare practitioners and the public. In December, TDA submitted written public comment to this task force stating that the CDC's ASAP voted to include healthcare personnel in Phase 1A allocation of initial COVID-19 vaccine. HCP were defined as paid and unpaid persons serving in healthcare settings who have the potential for direct or indirect exposure to patients or infectious materials. Dentists and dental team members fit within this definition as they are exposed to patients' potentially infectious materials when providing dental treatment. In early January, the CDC confirmed that dentists, dental teams, and dental students are included in its initial recommendation for healthcare personnel to be among those offered the first doses of COVID-19 vaccine. CDC issued this clarification so that jurisdictions would not overlook dental healthcare personnel as they made their decisions about vaccine access. As TDA testified to you in December, oral health care is integral to overall health. Texas staying healthy depends on maintaining continued access to health care, including dental treatment. Making COVID-19 vaccines available to dental health care personnel is crucial for Texas to maintain a strong dental workforce. This helps ensure that dental care can continue being delivered safely to patients. As an integral part of Texas' overall healthcare infrastructure, dentists and their teams provide direct patient care that is key to the state's overall COVID-19 response. TDA respectfully requests that our testimony today be shared with the EVAP, and thanks you again for the opportunity to comment.
Hi, thank you for your comments, and absolutely we will share that with the EVAP, with the expert vaccine allocation panel, and I know it's been a topic of discussion there, so thank you. Mr. Chacon, tell me where we stand.
Yes, sir. Real quickly, let me ask the producers. Producers, have we received anyone else in the Q&A wanting to provide oral comment at this time?
This is Susanna, one of the producers for this meeting. We've not received any other requests for public comment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sparkman. Dr. Hellerstedt, at this time, we have no one else wanting to provide oral comment. I'll turn over the meeting over to you for agenda item number 7.
Very good. Agenda item 7 is to plan and discuss our future meeting topics, and I'm checking I'm not muted. Let's open it up for discussion. I think it's fair to say that we'll probably be meeting again before the pandemic is completely resolved. So clearly, I think COVID-19 would be an agenda item. Is there any disagreement with that?
I think we should continue to focus on COVID-19.
Very good. Are there other topics of, and it would probably be similar to what we did here. In other words, status report of the state of the pandemic in Texas, the strain or lack thereof that it's putting on our healthcare resources, the extent, the prevalence in the community, and all those related topics, therapeutics, vaccine, et cetera. I'm sure those will be part of the discussion. Is there anything else about COVID-19 that folks would want to include on a future agenda? Very good.
I'm sorry, John. The other piece to this is going to be the emergence of variants. That's a moving target. You know, we probably could do a much better job in terms of genomic virus sequencing to get a better extent of that. And I've had actually some interesting discussions now with at least one governor of another state and a couple of other individuals about the impact of the UK variant, South African variant, and what we need to do, and likely a homegrown variant. So I think that would be a useful topic for discussion at some point.
Very good. I agree. So any dissension from that, I think that'll be very important as that knowledge evolves. Are there topics other than pandemic-related topics, COVID-related topics that folks would want on the agenda for the next meeting? Not hearing any. How about timing? I mean, what we'll have to do is go back and figure out exact timing. But what I would want from this group is a sense of just in general. Are we talking about a month, 2 months, 3 months? Or what is the sense of folks? I mean, I'll say for myself, it's obviously we're in a very critical phase and things are moving very quickly. I greatly value these meetings. I think they're of value to us in public health. I hope they're of value to the members of the committee, and I feel certain that they're of value to the public as well. With that in mind, what do folks suggest?
How about in 6 weeks?
I heard 6 weeks.
This is Dr. Varma. Yeah.
Very good.
Commissioner Hellerstedt, this is David Lakey. I think one issue that may be useful, since we're approaching the legislative session, and that next meeting would be in the middle of the session, would be to get an update related to the support to improve the public health infrastructure, the things that you've requested during the legislative session, so that we know as we prepare for the next big event, are we getting the things we need during the session to help us do that? And so if there's a way to have a briefing related to the things that you've requested during the session and any really important bills related to better improving the preparedness infrastructure for Texas, I think that would be helpful at the next meeting. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, obviously we'll have to approach that while looking at the charge of the task force and the Public Meetings Act, et cetera, and the prohibition that we have as an agency against any kind of advocacy. But I think within those parameters, which I'd have to come back with my team and talk an awful lot about, I think that would be, if it's permissible, I think that would be a natural subject to talk about at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Anybody have a different perspective? So I'm hearing like 6 weeks, talk about COVID the way we did this time, but maybe add also a sort of a legislative liaison update. Other ideas, comments, disagree?
I think reviewing the distribution of the vaccine in 6 weeks is going to be very important. We should have a very different portfolio of options and some idea of what's working and what's not. And going back to Peter's comment about the need for scale and doing this simply and at large numbers is going to be critical. Thank you.
Very good. Other comments, questions? Sorry, I'm getting literally pinged. Got a little distracted there. So are we converging on a consensus? 6 weeks, COVID plus an update plus a look at what our plans are for future more high volume phases of vaccine distribution and administration. Did I capture that?
Agree with all.
Yes.
I agree. Any dissension? And I don't think, Mr. Chacon, I don't think we have to take a vote or a roll call. So I'm just going to proceed with what we have so far. Other business, other comments, again, particularly related to future meetings and future agenda items.
I have a suggestion. I have read that there's a possibility that there may be a need for annual vaccination. So that might be something that we talk about, how to go about doing that in the state.
Yeah, I think that if we know more about that in 6 weeks, that would certainly be fair game to be included in that general topic.
I know it seems like it's really early to talk about, but I don't think it's ever too early to start planning.
Yes. We wish we got vaccine on such a regular schedule that we knew weeks in advance instead of hours, but that's an aside. Sorry. But yeah, you're right. I mean, again, if we know something, we can address it then. Dr. Hotez, you are the vaccinologist here. Do you have any guesses as to whether an annual vaccine will be likely?
Well, I think just to clarify, we talk about annual flu vaccines is because there are new flu strains emerging. They undergo so much variation. If we need boosters of COVID-19 vaccine, I do not think it'll be because of antigenic variation, but it could be because the protection is not durable with some of the newer technology vaccines, which we don't really know. So rather than phrase it as, I think for the COVID-19, the way some people are thinking of it, less of an annual thing and more, there may be a need for boosters down the line, depending on if there's some of the vaccine technologies are not giving long-lasting protection. Now, if there's enough variation and new variants emerge, we may need to make additional vaccines, and there may be need for universal coronavirus vaccines, and this is something we're all looking at.
Right, and Peter, I think it's worth commenting on, and correct me if you disagree, but one of the things that's very implicit in what you're saying, and we should all realize, is even if we beat back the pandemic, this virus is going to be circulating in the human population for who knows how long, many years, I think, unless we stumble upon, stumble's not the right word, unless we find some kind of breakthrough sort of treatment, prophylaxis, vaccination that would eliminate the SARS-CoV-2 virus. But I think that's a point worth making, so that even if we beat it back, it's going to be there in the background, and we're going to need to make sure that we have excellent surveillance and that we have excellent protection.
Yeah, I mean, we began working on coronavirus vaccines a decade ago with, Jim LeDuc's group at UTMB Galveston, because we did it because of SARS-1. And then while we were working on the SARS-1 vaccine, MERS came up. These are both coronaviruses, then COVID-19. So I think we can count on COVID-26 coming up, or COVID-32. This is a new normal. We'll see a new major coronavirus every decade if recent history is anything is predictive. So we're going to have infrastructure in place for coronaviruses, very much like we have for flu currently, and that's going to be a constant topic of discussion.
You think there may be herd immunity in 1 year or so, 70%, 80%, it may not be necessary to be vaccinated every year.
That's a possibility, yeah. So, I mean, I think the other point is there's just going to have to be a lot of communication with the American people, because there's we're learning more about the virus every day. There need to be boosters for some of the vaccines. And it may be with the same vaccine or a different vaccine. We're going to have pediatric trials. So what about vaccinating kids prior to school? There's just going to be so many issues. So the level of communication required is going to be quite a bit. And, unfortunately, the way Operation Warp Speed worked, it was a great program in terms of as a development program, but it kind of fell short. It was never really intended to be involved in vaccine distribution. And the communications were largely left to the pharma CEOs, who were pretty uneven in their ability to communicate. So hopefully those things will get corrected in 2021.
Very good. Other comments, questions from the task force members? Very good. Again, my sincere thanks. Thank you for your excellent participation, excellent discussion. And with no further business, I declare that we are adjourned.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hellerstedt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, the time is 3:30 p.m. Producers, can you end the live event, please?
Manage your honors